What's up? We're talking rites of passage. So Matt VanShoyck and I, Aaron Guyett, we were at this thing called the big event, and I did an hour and a half. It was almost an hour and a half. Got cut. It was an hour and 15 on rites of passage. I thought I had an hour and a half, but then I cut 15 minutes off of it. But then the cool part was, so many people were like, "Wait, hold on, I need to talk about this a little bit more." So we did probably an hour Q&A afterwards. And then you and I did a little aside, and I was like, well, yeah, I'll share my whole presentation. I'll share all of my links. I'll share all the stuff that I'm doing with my kids. And why don't we hop on a call and talk about it? So here we are.
Yeah, dude, I could have talked about this for hours. Like, my head is still spinning from the talk that we had. And I think the biggest reason why is just because, like, you're talking about all of these things that you could do with your kids, right? Mm-hmm. And like all of these steps to kind of help them move into adulthood. And the whole time I was thinking, like, whoa, I haven't even done this. Like, I haven't done this, mm-hmm. Right? Like, you're talking about taking your kids out on 5-day backpacking, 10-day backpacking trips. And I'm like, man, I don't even know if I would make it on a 10-day backpacking trip, right? And like all of the skills and necessities that you would have to have and be able to plan for, I was like, oh shoot, like I'm gonna have to get my stuff together before I can even think about doing this with my kids. And the whole time you were talking, that's all I was thinking about. So I know that I missed so many important, like, golden nuggets of information because I was just like stuck on the first 5 minutes of your talk.
Well, that's awesome. So, and I think I said it at the end, well, at least I said it in the Q&A later on that evening, but the huge thing that I got out of, so first of all, I think my brain's only, somewhat different in that I've been very comfortable thinking about 40,000 foot view, 10,000 foot view, and boots on the ground all at the same time. Mm-hmm. But in terms of execution, like, I'm just like everybody else, dude. I fail, I screw it up, I forget, I look at myself in the mirror and I'm like, really, that's the kind of person you're going to be? Like, okay, like, that's not what God called you to be. So how about you step into that instead of stepping into whatever default crappy, self-preservation ego thing that you're doing right now. So from an execution standpoint, like, I'm absolutely the same procrastinator, right. Have default mechanisms that are unhealthy, totally do like toxic coping stuff, whether it's proclivity for anger. Obviously my proclivity for violence is pretty much gone. I mean, in that, like, I still have a proclivity for violence, but it's just not, I've been saved out of, truly right. Forgiven out of, continuing that into, my marriage or my kids, and even my general lifestyle or whatever, but still, like, proclivity for anger, proclivity to self-preserve. And so also, like, blow my own self up, like create conflict when there doesn't need to be conflict. Like, so all of those things. And I probably could have started with that, but then the only issue with starting with that at something like the big event is then that, that rabbit trails off super fast.
Sure.
Right? Yeah. And then you're down those rabbit trails, and it's like, I got to get the meat and potatoes out here so we can at least look at the meat and potatoes and talk about the meat and potatoes. And then we can get into why it doesn't work for me, but it will still end up working for me, because even though it doesn't work, it does work. It's because it's not about me anymore. It's about my kids. And so the beauty is the rite of passage actually does more for holding the parent accountable, more right. Toward the parent being intentional. It has really little to do with your child. Like, your child is humans, little humans are the most impressionable. You look at the wide landscape of children interaction, and we are kind of normalized with this. Like, we have a pretty good life. We've got a lot of things going for us. Like, we don't have to worry about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? We're truly, it's about like, how does the human thrive more or whatever? Because we have shelter, we have clothes, we have food, like even people that don't do, right? It's like,
Right.
well,
Sure.
you do, you just have crappier versions of it.
Right.
And your crappy versions are incredible versions comparative to other societies. But then you look at other societies that are out there, it's like, dude, these kids have nothing, or these kids are like in the sex trade or whatever, like horrible. And they're able to cope and deal. And obviously it's unhealthy, it's wrong, right? Morally and ethically, but they're able to deal. And so, I think about that and it's like, it has much more to do with the parental intentionality because of this impressionable being that
Right.
you have, you've been blessed with, right? And if you choose to see it that way, that worldview changes kind of how we can approach what it is that we do. So
yeah, and that's the whole my whole thought process is like this, like I'm really gonna have to get it together like in here first before I can think about, and maybe that's kind of like an all or nothing mentality, and I definitely don't want to take that. I think there's value probably in learning alongside my kids
100%.
a lot of this, and
and value showing your kids that you didn't do what you were supposed to do.
Yeah, right.
Like, now I got to admit that, and I got to own my mistakes, and
sure.
Extreme ownership, right?
Right. Yeah, man. It's pretty crazy. I was listening to did you listen to Alex and Vaughn on their podcast? I'm not sure what Alex's podcast is called.
That's why I randomly put 7 P's. Because they're like 5 P's. I remember piss poor performance.
Yeah. So what are the 7 P's again?
Perfect prior planning prevents piss poor performance.
There it is. Right. So they kind of went off on a little tangent about like rites of passage in that. And I think there was like a really common thread in that none of the guys really that were at the event had been through any kind of like rites of passage with their father. Right. And they were kind of going back and looking at like, the path of entrepreneurship and like building this thing, and then like everything blows up, and then now you've got to like reset and kind of build again, and how that maybe is like their kind of rite of passage that they've been through. And I got to thinking about that, and I never did any of this stuff with my dad. He's dead now. He passed about 1.5 years ago. But we weren't really that close, and it just wasn't something that he would have been interested in. So I think that I joined the National Guard in order to pay for college, right? And then I went to basic training, and not too long after basic training, I deployed overseas. And spending the year in Iraq, when I came back, like I always said to myself, like looking back, like that's when I became a man. Was when I went through that and then returned home, like I had this life experience and I'd been through some stuff, right? And that's when I really felt like I was ready to like go into the world and be a productive part of society. And so like looking back on my life, like I never experienced anything like what you and I are talking about today, but I did experience a rite of passage. And it's funny, you talked about, I remember you saying it has to be like really hard, right? And like a little bit dangerous, like possibly death. And as I'm like thinking back on my tour, I'm like ticking these boxes, like, oh, yep, that's what it was. That was my rite of passage in life.
Yeah. Well, and so the 3 C's, right? So challenge, which is all of those things, right? And complexity is part of the challenge, which obviously that's pretty complex. You probably wish you had more training, in hindsight, like while you're there, like, dang, I gotta learn this on the fly. Or like, oof, yeah, those are areas that we don't know, or whatever. Courageous action, right, is the third one. But then communal necessity, that's huge. Like combat is huge. Communal, like you are there for you. If you aren't there for your brothers, like don't be there, right? You're better off dead, right? You might as well die, kind of a thing. And that 100%, right, is rite of passage. It's funny for me. I feel like I didn't become a productive member of society and have my poop in a group, so to speak, until I was 27. And so I had gone through combat. So I'd gone through other rites of passage. I actually did something, it wasn't very challenging. And the community affirmed it, but there wasn't a communal necessity. Like I didn't have to do this. And it was actually through the Catholic Church I did, where I got all these letters or whatever. But I will say, like, my brain at that point was so spun out on self-preservation and ego-driven or prideful romantic ideals, really. And romantic ideals are good. They can be good carrots, but they can also swallow a person's soul, kind of, right? Because it's like, oh, if you don't get the girl and you don't save the day, then you're a horrible person. And then you get like imposter syndrome. And there's all sorts of other things that pop up or whatever out of that. And so I was 27, and it was more like, it was a come to Jesus moment, literally, but figuratively too. It was like owning, like truly being able to own my mistakes for me and not trying to figure out ways to manipulate or coerce my way out of it. Because if you're decently attuned socially, if you have some decent EQ and some decent IQ, you can really start to, manipulate some people and control some people. It's not real control, they're not deciding into it. You're tricking them into it. And that's a effed up way to live, man, because that hole, there is no end to that hole. It's like trying to find the bottom of Instagram. It just doesn't exist, you'll go down that rabbit hole for forever, and you will lose your soul, like 100%. You will lose yourself. And the only thing that will be left is your ego, which isn't even, it's real, but it's not real, right? It's like, it's this wrong version of you, anyways. So we don't have to go down that. I digress. Back to rites of passage. So do you want to take a look under the hood? I also created a video yesterday where I walked through all of this stuff, looking at the sort of presentation that I prepared. So if we had some sort of, I don't know, video or whatever, I could have kind of shown some visuals, which the thing is, like, I'm pretty certain none of us there are auditory learners. So my storytelling had to be on point. And I'm fairly certain that you were one of every single person that there was a certain particular part that you just started like spinning on, like, and it was like, well, there's no point in me trying to grab the rest of this, because I'm already spun out on this particular thing.
Dude, it was crazy. Like, I don't know from your perspective, but like from where I was sitting, you could see it happen. Like, as you were talking, like you could see someone go, oh, and then just like their brain just spin off and shoot into outer space.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, and there's a lot of doers there. So that's the curse of the doer as well. It's like you're ready to start implementing and executing and doing something. And so you grab onto the, the first thing that's of value that you can do. And it's like, okay, how am I going to do this? And why didn't I do this? And where, where is this going to come from? And how do I present it? And yeah, absolutely. So I'll share my screen. I think, which way do I want to go here? I think I go to this one. See my dirty desktop. And then we'll go to here. Oh, there. And then actually, let me move this. Okay, cool. Yeah, so I can even go to this, which is I presented on. So this is the talk, which I think is a good place to kind of see where I was wave topping, kind of outlining, but then we'll jump into the weeds on my particular rite of passage, which is not here, it's here. And I don't know if we want to look at it that way.
Dude, you have it outlined by day?
Yeah. We'll jump into that.
Wow.
But it's really the actual rite of passage that I've got very clearly articulated. The way to that is not as, I need to keep it a little bit more ambiguous, because One, if I were to rule my house as if, I was ruling Firewatch or something, and my wife might kill me in my sleep. So it's just kind of disrespectful to the personality that she is. So I just don't do that. But we talked about, what's at the top of the mountain, and that's a successful adult. And then we talked about, like, for me, I just had this, like, and I still have this, like, really vivid vision. I have the same vision actually with Christianity and discipleship in Christianity. It's like you're trying to uncover following Christ, and so before you do, you don't even know Christ, really, right? Even if you have been in the church or whatever, but you really don't know Christ. You haven't had a personal encounter with Christ, and so you dig, and then you see what you think is just a cross. And then as you dig more, it's a cross, but it's on top of a steeple of a church, and it's in a community of people. And as you dig, you're thinking, and I think about archaeology, right? You find whole societies, right? As you dig. And at first it's just, it's, in this talk that I gave, it was just this arrowhead, which represents rites of passage, right? For the Native American. But then as you dig, it's like, no, it's not an arrowhead. It's an entire mountain that you unearth, right? And for me, that I encountered and started discovering. And then it's like, okay, well, let's start traipsing up this mountain. Let's start traversing this mountain. And the cool part of any sort of, mountain climb or whatever is it doesn't always go as planned. And there's going to be valleys that you think is, or peaks that you think are the top, and it's not. It's a false peak, and all that cool word picture stuff.
Right.
But for me, the top of the mountain is a successful adult. Like, are my kids going to be successful adults? And what does that mean? I don't have to, so I will include my belief system of Christianity and following Christ. And I think that will help them gain autonomy and mastery and purpose for certain. However, even if you're a Muslim or you, or believe in no God, whatever, like, autonomy, mastery, and purpose is going to be part and parcel to the adult that's a successful adult, not a failing adult, right?
Yeah.
And we have enough examples of failing adults, and that's why it's so easy to paint the picture of the 35-year-old that's either still at home with their parents or living off of their parents' dime, but then disrespecting themselves and everybody around them, to include their parents. And every, guy, it's like every female they come across, if they're, into females or whatever, and then even disrespecting their own coworkers and stuff. And everything's about this selfish, collection. Like, how do I prop myself up? And a lot of that's based out of insecurity and a lack of autonomy, right? They feel like they don't have the free will they feel like they have to control everything. And then a lack of them mastering something, or maybe they're just mastering manipulation, which is maybe worse. But definitely they lack purpose and meaning. Like, there is no purpose and meaning. They say things like, purpose is to get as many chicks as possible, or to get as much money as. It's like, dude, that's a never ending tunnel. It's like, again, it's finding the bottom of Instagram. Hold on one second.
Right.
So I can send this Prezi to you. I don't need to belabor you with the whole talk again, but then it's like, okay, so how successful adults will you do it with rites of passage and intentional leadership? And to me, like, good leaders have followers, but great leaders build leaders. And that is what a parent is. A parent is a leader, and it's a leader that's leading a leader. And for me, because of my belief system, it's also a disciple that's discipling other disciples, right? To be able to disciple.
Hey, time out.
Yeah.
By the way, I just wanted to say, as you're mentioning this discipleship, thank you for putting together the Discipled in Christ site and the whole program. Day 3 today. So
nice. Did you do day 0?
Yeah, I did day 0.
What were your carrots and sticks? Or did you do carrots and sticks?
I didn't do carrots and sticks. I didn't go as far as you did. I'm just committed to this thing.
Yeah.
I'm going to do it. And so, way off topic, but something that I came back from the Brotherhood of Fatherhood with, and I think that a lot of it had to do with the way that you spoke and JT Farr also. listening to the two of you talk, dude, I had a reconnection with God while I was there.
That's awesome.
And I think that when I came home and I was texting you about your website issue, I was like, come on, man, like this is what I'm supposed to do. That was the direction that I was supposed to go. Like I really feel like I was meant to find, like you and I were meant to meet each other so that I could hear you speak. Same thing with JT, so that I would end up on your website and discipling myself. So I really, really appreciate what you've put together there. It's really, really special for me. So thank you for that. And didn't mean to knock you off topic there, but I just want to say thanks for that at the moment.
No, that's incredible. And you'll watch me cry, and you'll watch me. There's some NAR stories that are gonna confront if you watch the videos. If you don't watch the videos,
yeah, I did. Your kids were sleeping. Your whole family was asleep, and you're like whispering into the.
Yeah, careful. You don't do it at a time where you're bound to fall asleep. You're like, what?
No, and thank you so much for putting that together.
Well, so I will say, I don't know if I think I talk about it a little bit, but I think I talked about it on some I'm not, I guess marketing video would be, for lack of a better term, like a marketing video of like, why did I do it? But it was, so I've been running a men's accountability group, facilitating a men's accountability group for now coming up on 4 years. And there was a bunch of us that just kept hitting these impasses. And so obviously we're still holding each other accountable, which is, I think, 1,000 times better than the average man, that's not in any sort of accountability and just kind of like hoping to do things right or whatever, and not getting checked when they're jacking things up according to the standards and beliefs that they believe or whatever. And that's, I think, why most people fall away from the Christian church. It's because somebody isn't really following Christ. They're just being, very human and doing human things, which is bound to get jacked up. Anyway, so I was really convicted on a couple of issues that I kept running into. And it was like, well, we don't do, the thing is, like most churches do weekly discipleship, and it's not even weekly discipleship. It's like an hour a week to like fix your whole week. And you just got to keep doing that forever. And it's like, well, I'm pretty certain the Bible doesn't say that. I'm pretty certain, Jesus specifically talks about daily bread. And so what's up? Where do we lose the daily thing? And then some churches are a little bit better. They have the church on the weekend, and then you do a small group, which is a little bit better. But it's like, I mean, it's still missing the whole daily aspect of this. And why is this not a habit? Why is this not a routine? And why is my belief system not just why am I not just constantly bumping up into it? Instead, I'm constantly stepping over it and doing things that are absolutely against the things that I at least say I believe. So do I really believe them? Well, no, I don't really believe them. If my actions don't, follow, if my fruit isn't there or whatever. And so it was like the Holy Spirit just punched me in the face, or punched me in the soul, really. And it was like, this is what you're doing. And I don't know if you've had Holy Spirit experiences. I've had a couple where they just like overwhelming love or overwhelming, emotion. And you can't really articulate what's happening, but you just know this is God, and you're encountering God in your life in this moment. And they've all been moments, right? They've all been like a couple of minutes, a couple of hours, maybe a day, maybe not even a couple of days for me, just maybe a day. And I'm not even kidding you. It was like this incredible Holy Spirit month. It was like this whole season where God is like, oh, this is what you're doing as you're discipling. Okay, this is what you're doing. And it was like, I couldn't not put the Discipled in Christ together, or it was the 100 in Strength course. I couldn't not put that course together. And then the same thing happened with Steve Starry, who is the reason why there's Discipled in Christ. He had a very similar encounter, and then we got connected. And so then we started walking that thing out. And the whole thing has been incredible, because typically I'm a doer, I'm an entrepreneur, all those things. So I'll just do something, I'll just do it. And Steve is in the same boat, but we've gone at the pace of God. And sometimes like we've had to like stall out and not do something for months. And we're both like looking at each other and like, oh, I know I'm not supposed to white knuckle this and do a bunch of stuff, but this is not like my personality. And so we literally got to kneel at the cross and like humble ourselves. It's like, okay, God, whatever it is that you want us to do. And it's like, oh, then that means you're not doing anything right now. It's like,
dude, it's hard to pump the brakes.
Yeah.
It's a really hard thing to do, man, especially for doers. But yeah, I mean, I think of myself in the same way. I did put it out to all of my gym members too. So if you get like an influx of,
I'm down.
Hopefully you will.
Yeah, I'm down. That's awesome. That's incredible. Yeah. So then jumping back in this, it's intentional parenting is intentional leadership, and it's leading so that you can create leaders, discipling so you can create disciples, and those disciples create disciples. And so I talked about the vision thing and talked about Sir Ernest Shackleton with endurance and all that stuff. This is the 3 C's that we were talking about. So challenge, which is risk of failure, probably risk of injury, maybe risk of death, complexity, hard to sell the wife on risk of death. So, but you'll see my things are like really difficult, and they could get injured, on any one of them. So
I was talking to my wife today about this, and I was kind of telling her the same thing that I had told you about my rite of passage, or what I believe to be my rite of passage over in Iraq.
Yeah.
Kind of talking about those things, and I had mentioned risk of death, and she was like, okay, yeah, huh? And then like 30 seconds after I said it, she's like, wait, what? Risk of death?
Yeah. So, I mean, it doesn't have to be crazy, like, Native American Indian Vision Quest stuff, or going to combat or whatever. Right. So being a cadre, being an instructor with special force experience, watching like, safety boundaries in some really extreme traumatic situations. Like you can make somebody extremely uncomfortable without, showing them to death's door. Right. And a lot of that is just like making them do like something hard, or making them, be alone with their thoughts for longer than they really want to be. I mean, like that right there is like pretty brutal for the average, at least the average American, average Canadian too. So then that, like we talked about that, talked about belief system, worldview. I don't know if you were hanging on or already spinning out when I got to this point, if there's any clarification needed here or whatever. I was talking about gravity I think it's a great example.
So when you mentioned gravity, that was where I was like I got lost there, because that you kind of already talked about it, through discipling your children. But like for me, that was my action item coming home, was to try to create gravity with my kids. Like I want them to always have that place that they can come, and they know that it's always going to be there. And to me, that is Christ. That's their faith. Right. And I wanted to create gravity there for them, so that it's always there. They know that. So my action item was just to pray every day with my kids.
Yeah, I saw that.
That's not something that I've been doing.
Yeah, so depending on where your walk is with Christ and Christianity, you probably also value the scriptures from at least the standpoint of being able to understand, the stories of where Christianity comes from, and being able to literally encounter Christ, as he's from his disciples' account, right? As he's interacting with the world around him, and disciples, and the religious elite of the time, and the government at the time. It's like I think a pretty rad encounter. So I can send you something as well that is scripture memory, and it's like literally 20 seconds. It's a videos that I've been making with my kids where we turn one scripture that we think is important into a song, and we do the ASL, American Sign Language, to it. So there's body movement, so it's kinesthetic, it's verbal, it's visual, right? And it has a tune to it. So then you typically will remember it like way
Sure.
you'll be amazed at how fast your kids memorize it. And you're like, I'm still learning it, you know. So it's so funny how that it is. And so we do that in the morning together as a family, you know, all 5 of us, we stand up and we do our little ASL and sing our little songs. But yeah, if you're interested, I'll send that to you as well. So
Sure, dude. I'll take all the help I can get, man.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, so I'm putting together a 52-week children's devotional for a 5 to 12 years old. And not that you couldn't be older. And my son is obviously younger than 5, and he's still doing the hand motions and learning it. And
Sure.
he'll have all this stuff memorized before he's 6, probably.
Right.
And it'll probably be with him for the rest of his life, which is that.
Yep.
I mean, it's like, man, that's the gravity, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah. So I'm putting together 52 weeks. It's a little slow going, but I want us to like learn the ASL and then be able to do it competently and sing the song and all that stuff. And then we have to figure out the melody, and that's always fun. We also have like arguments for God's existence in song form and all these other things, but like all of this stuff, instead of being a militaristic butthole that I could be, it's like, let's have fun, you know, and
Right.
we can memorize lots of things and have fun with it. So yeah, gravity, that's huge. And it's something that you just don't think about, you know, like you literally don't think about gravity, but because of gravity, you're able to do so much stuff. So we rely on it, we believe in it, and we actually walk out and talk out our beliefs in gravity because it's just there and it exists. And that's how our worldviews are. But if you're constantly flipping and flopping to different worldviews, you literally are creating massive insecurities, you know, whether it's personally or familially or communally. And I feel like that's one of the myriad of issues that we find ourselves in as a society right now. So we can't agree on a worldview.
Yeah.
But I digress. Get me down a rabbit hole there. This stuff, we don't really have to talk about that unless you want to talk OODA loop or begin with the end in mind and consistency.
No, that's fine. But I do want to ask you a question. So do you follow Mark Divine?
No, I mean, I know of him, but no, I'm not a follower.
I just like, I've read some of Mark Divine's stuff and like I always go back and forth on him, like, cause he's kind of out there a little bit. And then I'm like, well, but that's a good idea. And then I hear what, like, I dig back in and I'm like, he went a little bit too far again. But, you know, he talks about, you know, your worldview and I heard you mention like lizard brain once or twice while you were doing your talk. And that's something that Divine talks about also. I just didn't know if that was something that you had kind of worked through and like shaped and molded to kind of be your own thing.
Yeah, no, not his stuff, but like The Whole Brain Child was probably one of the best books that I read for like understanding brain and brain development. But I've read, you know, Mindsight as well, actually, Mindset, and a few other like really good books, and even like Charles Duhigg's The Power of Habit and Atomic Habits by James Clear. Like they talk a little bit about the psyche and what's going on there. Upward Spiral, I just actually crushed that book on the way back from Kalispell to here. And that's a pretty good book about understanding more of the complexity of the brain, like the anterior cingulate gyrus and all these like weird components of the brain, the amygdala, and how these things factor into whether it's depression and anxiety or feeling good and thriving, you know, all this stuff. It's interesting to me, you know, you know, some people are like, oh, that disproves God. It's like, actually the opposite. It very much proves God. Like for me, it's like, I'd be willing to hear the argument where it disproves God. That'd be very interesting. I haven't heard one worth an iota of salt yet, in that realm. A lot of people think like science and faith, you know, have to be separate. And it's like, no, it's quite the opposite. Without God, science crumbles because then everything's based on chaos and chance, and that just doesn't work. But anyway, so yeah, so a lot of that stuff has just come out of my own study and interest in brain and brain development, and just understanding, generally speaking, lower limbic, lizard brain, right, and midbrain or mammalian brain, and then upper cognitive, more of our Homo sapien part, where we have this incredible ability to think about thinking, which most, if not any other species has. So yeah, pretty incredible.
Cool.
And why not? I mean, God gave that to us for a reason.
Right.
That's the whole, I mean, that's the whole point of the 100 in a strength. It's like using this thing that is our brain, and even it's the midbrain that actually holds the habit. And so once you've built your habits, then your habits build you, right? But you get to choose your habit, right? And sometimes the habit chooses you, but that doesn't mean that you can't make a change, once you become aware of that. So, but this is the meat and potato. This is where you wanted to go, I'm fairly certain, into my rite of passage for my kids.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, sure, it's interesting to see. I think I just needed to hear it again to begin to wrap my head. Like, now that I've moved off of myself, when I'm thinking about this, like hearing some of this stuff again, I'm like, okay, here are places where I can begin to focus and build. Yes, first on me, but also with them.
Yeah. So you have how old?
So I have an 8-year-old son, I have a 10-year-old son, and a 13-year-old daughter.
Nice.
And thinking about a rite of passage for my daughter scares the crap out of me.
Really?
Yeah, dude. I don't know why.
Why is that?
I don't know why. I'm not sure. Like, I mean, man, to be honest with you, thinking about it for my sons is equally as scary. Can I prepare these little boys to be men in the world? That feels like a monumental task. But yeah, I don't know, man. It just seems, in my head, it seems different for a boy than it does for a girl. And I don't know if that's just like some past bias, like creeping in with gender roles and all of this. I don't know. I definitely, it's not sitting well with me. It just, it's not sitting. Let me explain this better. It's not sitting well with me that I'm looking at a rite of passage for my daughter differently than I would for my sons.
Yeah. I mean, I think it can be. I think the way, so my daughters will do essentially the same rites of passage as my son, but how that transpires and how they learn it and how I frame it, and also how they frame it, how I perceive it and how they perceive it will be light years different.
Yeah,
right.
Sure.
Male to female. But the thing is, like, my daughter can coordinate a backpacking trip, and she can throw a backpack on and she can, hike that or whatever. I'm just using, the backpack as the sort of the vehicle. But the getting from point A to point B is, can be totally different. Like the Vaughn's idea of the moto trip, where it's like a multi-day and you need to coordinate supplies and you need to set up your permits, and, you need to make sure you have, these particular things. You need to make sure that you're in shape, and the other, guys or girls or whatever that are coming with you are in shape enough to be able to handle it, so then they don't bonk out. And if they do, like, do you have, first aid understanding, at least enough of an awareness to keep somebody going until, emergency vehicles or emergency personnel arrive. Like, you start to think about it as like, yeah, that's a perfect scenario. It doesn't have to be a backpacking trip. It doesn't have to be a moto trip, but the thing is, it's like, I find I heard somebody talking about the rite of passage that my 16-year-old's going to do. And I've got to use the voice for sure. Cause this guy's like full on machismo. And I think what he's saying, I think he is a warrior poet, intelligent, maybe, I don't know. But I was like, yeah, so you're going to have your kid do this like really gnarly couple of hour evolution of moving this like incredible amount of weight from point A to point B or whatever. like, that's awesome. But like, where in that is he developing social emotional skills?
Right.
Where in that is he developing communication? Where in that is he learning to respect adults that he should respect? And where in that is he learning to understand that some adults probably don't deserve respect? And how do you understand that nuance? And how do you figure that out? How do you learn that without encountering that? And so there's a bunch of things that he's not going to encounter. And so he's going to have this massive amount of strength, which are also going to give him this massive amount of confidence and this massive amount of physical competence. But his mental, emotional, and spiritual is almost non-existent. And granted, you can argue the case like, oh, well, he'll be going into like sort of a spiritual and mental and psychological kind of warfare scenario in order to be able to complete this. Yeah, but as a lone wolf, like by himself, no. Right. And that's why for me, it's like the 12-year-old is, hey, you're proving that you can do things on your own, but not because I want you to be a lone wolf, because the 16-year-old, it's all about doing things in community and tight community. And that's where, so you've learned the basics to be able to bring you into that. And you have, a certain amount of intelligence and a certain amount of spiritual acumen and emotional acumen, and even social acumen, understanding baselines and things like that, and how to read body language and behavior profiling and, all those good things, and defend yourself. And, if worse comes to worse, but it's like, okay, but now like, let's enter in where we get to interact and transact and exchange with other humans.
Right.
That's where it gets real hard.
Yeah, man. Anytime you bring another person into the mix, it just like complicates everything tenfold.
Yeah. Yeah. So I can't remember. I think it was, oh shoot, I'm going to forget who I first heard this from, but it was like humans amplify everything.
Yeah.
Good and bad, right? It's like you add more humans and it's like you get an amplification. If it's not going well, it's amplified. If it's going really well, that's amplified too. And that just going to sports games or, seeing the scenario, 9/11, which commemorated or whatever, right? It's like, dude, that got real worse real quick.
Yeah.
So for me, it's like, I just wanted to design, it's like, okay, when they're independent adults, will they understand and have it affirmed and confirmed that like, dude, you're an independent adult, go be an independent adult. If you still want to live under this house, there's got to be some justification. And then you also will understand that there's also going to be some rules, because this is my house, not your house. So, but it's, so I'm not saying like, oh, kick your kid out or whatever. Right. But it's like, man, what, how do I want to set my kid up for success out in the real world? And so I just jotted down a few things, and then I jotted a few more down and jotted a few more down. And now I'm pretty settled on this. It's like, I want them to have the opportunity and have really good high scores and set that expectation, because if you set the expectation, chances are they'll meet it, or exceed it. If you don't set the expectation, then they're just going to do kind of whatever, because they won't know what to do. And so high scores, ACT, SAT, even LSAT, even MCAT, which I know is like higher level praxis tests. And that's the thing is, if they only take those tests and they don't ever go to university, and I'm totally okay with that. Think about all of the things that you learn to prepare for a test.
Oh yeah.
To actually take a test.
Yeah.
I mean, that's reality slapping you in the face pretty dang hard. And then if you fail or you don't do good, it's like, then, that right there, it's like that in itself could be its own little rite of passage, right? Because it's the only thing that's missing is like, well, does the community need that? I'm like, well, maybe not. You could maybe frame it that way, whatever. So I built out, and I would challenge you, like, just start even stream of conscious journaling on what your 18-year-old daughter would look like in her best possible future as an 18-year-old. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, what does that look like? It's like, understands a respectful man and a disrespectful man. right? Understands a respectful woman and a disrespectful woman, knows how to respect her elders or authority, but also doesn't just do things blindly, right? And take things at face value. Will maybe spend the time to research or understand like where that authority figure is coming from. And maybe that authority figure is, like the Nazis were authority figures.
Yeah, right.
We had Nuremberg trials, like saying bodily autonomy is a thing for experimental medical procedures. And then,
well, you can respect people and still be thoughtful.
Yeah. So I think articulating that gives you a much better starting point to then reverse engineer back from, instead of like, okay, what's the thing that I'm going to build out for her when she's 14 so that she knows that she's an adolescent, or tomorrow so that she knows that she's an adolescent. It's like, okay, maybe the adolescent ship has sailed, but that doesn't mean that from adolescent to adulthood, even if it's guided adulthood, can't happen. Or even starting to, have conversations around what is good adolescence and not good adolescence. What is, what are good choices and bad choices? Why do we know that that's true? And how do we gauge that? And where is our moral plumb line? And where does it come from? And why is it like that? And, and those, I think those conversations can be just as profitable as doing a whole, well thought out, crazy executed 5-day ordeal. Sometimes a powerful conversation can completely transform and change the trajectory of a person's life,
Yeah. I'm laughing because of like, I feel like I've had several of those powerful trajectory changing conversations in recent days.
Which is awesome.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's good. Like I always want my kids to like the one thing that I know that I wanted for my kids was I want them to be thoughtful in their decision making, right? Like, hey, you're going to make a bad choice. Like it's going to happen, but I want you to think about what it is that you're doing. Like, at least give me a reason for why you're doing this thing. Mm-hmm. So, you kind of talked about that a little bit, and that's like, we do that now. Mm-hmm. So now I feel like, okay, I'm doing something.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, just like, I think about, my parents didn't really give me any of these rites of passage or, and they are flawed or whatever, and I'm going to screw things up too as a parent. But I'll tell you what, like, I learned hard work from them. That is something that and I didn't learn it because they told me that you need to work hard. I learned it because I watched them work their butts off my entire childhood into adolescent, into my teenage years. And now I don't know how to not do that. It's like, it's just an integral, intrinsic part of my being. And maybe DNA has something to do with it, but I really don't think so. I mean, I think that was a cultivated, something caught, not taught.
Yeah, for sure, man. Yeah. The more you talk through this, like it's so easy to get hung up on the rite of passage, like the culmination of all of this, right? Like, but man, this seems like it's almost like you're writing like your own guide to parenting your specific children.
100%. Yeah, the rites of passage hold me accountable to be intentional on a daily basis, right, for the child that I want them to become, and not like, oh, I want you to be a football player, so I'm going to, force you into this hole that is football player or whatever. It's like, no, I want you to be a responsible, it's more about character development and principles than it is about like what you actually do. And so, and I thought, the best way to hold me accountable to that is to have some epic events. And then to me, the cool part is, for instance, this is something I was talking to Vaughn about, and I think maybe you went inside or whatever, because you're probably spinning out again or whatnot. But it was like, so day 6 on their 5-day at their 12-year-old is like they'll record an autonomy, mastery, and purpose video. And then, so they'll come in and like everybody in the community, their teachers, their coaches, their family, their friends, right, will all come in. And, I will help coordinate that. My wife will help coordinate that. And we'll watch their video of, what they believe their autonomy, mastery, and purpose is, not what I told them to say, or, whatever, it's on them. And then that community will begin to speak and read and give them letters that affirm that you're no longer a child. And we don't look at you as a child, and you are now an adolescent. And there's a certain amount of freedom that comes with that. And there's a certain amount of responsibility that comes with that. And we need, in our community, we need good adolescents, because there's so many out there that are wayward and making bad choices. And so it'll just be the entire community, their entire community, affirming and confirming that in this great moment, right? Whatever they were able to, accomplish and finish. And I'll know if they're going to fail it or pass it or whatever on day 5. So the text will go out on, yep, the event is happening, the celebration is happening. But then the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give them gifts, and it'll symbolize, something. So they'll be able to actually have, just like you have the arrowhead. It's like you hold it in your hand, you see it, and you're like, I know what this means,
Right.
And so it's a constant reminder beyond just that one incredible moment, that hopefully changes the course of their life for the better. But then it's like reminders that they'll constantly see. And there will be something similar for the 16-year-old one, and then something similar for the 18-year-old one. But the 12-year-old one, for me, there will be a lot more of that, a lot more gifts and things. Because to me, it's like, okay, I want to set you up for success for this really gnarly one that's coming up that's 16, and this really gnarlier one coming up that's called life and reality as an adult. Right.
Yeah.
Because that will have its own meaning in itself. So yeah. Whether it's this or, whatever else.
Yeah, man, this is super cool.
Yeah. So I don't know if you want me to break down any more of these things, or, already I could tell you're like starting to spin now in a good way, right? It's like,
yeah, for sure.
Like, here we go. Okay.
Yeah.
Here we are again.
It kind of reminds me a little bit of like when I first found CrossFit, which was like this huge life-changing thing for me, right? I mean, so much so that I walked away from my 6-figure job and opened a gym, and it kind of became my life and consumed me. But I would listen to Glassman talk, right? And I don't know if you've ever listened to Greg Glassman talk about CrossFit before, but like the dude is like super crazy passionate, and it reminds me of the way that you talk about rites of passage, right? Like you can tell that this is a thing that you love, and it sucks you in, right? But the problem is that I could only get, like, when I would listen to Glassman talk on a podcast, I would get like 5 minutes in and spin off.
Yeah.
Then I'd have to come back, and then I would get 10 minutes in and then spin off. And I would have to listen to the same thing like 10 times before I would finally get through it all, because it would just, I'm getting pulled in all of these different directions. And I'll be honest with you, dude, it's exciting.
Yeah.
It's exciting for me as a parent, because, one of the things that I've been working on, Aaron, is like answering the question, who am I?
Yeah.
So this has something, I'll just tell you. So I'm working on this question of who am I, right?
Yeah.
And I like for months and months and months, like this has been a daily thing for me to like work through and try to figure out. And then I get on the plane on my way back from Kalispell, and it like smacks me in the face. Like, I am a son of God, created in his image, given the opportunity to be an intentional father for my children, a loving, kind, and devoted husband to my wife, and a hand for those that need help. Right? So like, it just, boom. Oh, yes, that is who I am. Right. And now it's almost like I'm looking into the future of like, that's who I am, but it's really who I want to be.
Yeah.
So I'm really like jamming on the intentional father part right now as we're talking through this, and it's like creating so much clarity for me about, hey man, like this is a pathway toward becoming the father that you want to be for your children.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's, yeah, it's about them, but kind of it's about me being who they need me to be so that they can become responsible and contributing and just good little dudes and good chicks, right? Like, so that, like, that's the thing that I'm spinning off on right now,
Yeah.
is like,
That's awesome.
is just the clarity that that these your talks are starting to provide for me. So I really appreciate that, man.
Well, and then I might add a critique and then add another place to spend a little bit, but put your wife before your kids in the who you are, because if you're not a good husband to your wife first, your kids won't know what a good husband and won't put their spouses first, right? Because that'll be something that has been exampled to them more is caught than taught.
Sure.
And then, so on that note, include your wife in your spin, and you could, so something that I did with my wife is like, hey, let's come up with a family purpose, family values, family vision, if you will, and start to articulate, what does this family look like from the inside, but then also what does this family look like from the outside in, like from our neighbors or from our friends or from our, and it'll be amazing at like how that will add, you'll of course spend more on that stuff.
Dude, I'm already spinning on this. So I've been running this question through my head now of like, what does it mean to be a VanShoyck? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
So like, I'm like, oh man, I just kind of figured out who I am. Like, I'm not ready for this question. So I asked my kids.
That's awesome.
And but like I told all three of them, I'm like, hey, I don't expect an answer today, but we're going to circle back to this at the end of the week.
Yeah.
And I want you to think about it, because that's what I'm doing. Like, I'm trying to I'm thinking about this.
Yeah.
And I think that's the start of that, like, family value conversation for us.
100%. Yeah. I mean, that's it, right? It's like that will etch that in. It's interesting. I think my wife inadvertently did this. I think she was just trying to get my kids to do stuff, but obviously there's something that rubbed her in a certain way, because she could have probably positioned this or framed this a million different ways or whatever, but she has a saying now, my wife does, and it's like, and I love it and I own it. And it's Guyett's do hard things. It's like done, and she was just trying to get, like, they were complaining about, having to, I don't know, make their bed or something like, I don't know, something stupid probably. But she's like, Guyett's do hard things. And it was crazy because I think it was just as much of a self-affirmation for her to be able to own that as it was for her, because she was dealing with a hard thing that was the kids not wanting to do a hard thing. And so it was like a self-affirming, yet also child affirming, yet also familial affirming thing. And it's like, man, I freaking love that, yeah, Guyett's do hard things. And so for me, like, I've in our purpose, it's like we accept the sacrifice and challenges to, be leaders of, or create intentional leadership in our home, and specifically in Christ, but and for our family first, and then for our community and beyond. But yeah, it's like, it'll be rad, because she'll just add that nuanced bit, or even my wife was like, I was like stuck, and not very long ago, it was like, I'll just figure it out, kind of a thing. But now it's like, no, including my wife in everything and seeing her as my wisest counsel. Like, she's the person that can cut me the deepest. She's the most intimately connected to me. And so she's the one, the human that I respect the most. And so it was like, oh, what should I put on this duct tape to have it like mean anything? And obviously everybody ripped up the duct tape ultimately anyways, but it was like, it was like, well, put their name because, they've been called this name, it should mean something. If it doesn't mean something, it will mean something now, because it's like, this is you, this isn't Aaron, the speaker. This isn't, somebody else that you have to follow or do. This is you. And when she said that, I was like, powerful. That's awesome. Yeah.
Super cool. Yeah. And I think it's cool that your wife came up with that. Like, I think part of the reason why I asked my kids is because I am super nervous that they're not going to buy into this the way that I am. You know what I mean? Like I'm more, I guess what I mean by that is like, I'm nervous that I can't create the kind of buy-in that I want them to have during this process. So I thought, what if I just kind of include them in the conversation?
Yeah.
Right. And let them kind of come up with some of these things with maybe some of my guidance.
Yeah.
So it's like their thing that they can own. Right.
Absolutely.
And I think it sounds like maybe that's a little bit of what your wife did, was like
100%.
She came up with this and now like she gets to own it.
Yeah. Yeah,
and
absolutely.
All kinds of hard stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, it's so funny. I guess that could probably also set us up for failure, right? It's like,
Yeah,
you're like, oh, we only do hard things. Like, no, we don't only do it. We do hard things, but we don't only do hard things.
Yeah.
We do easy things too. We
No,
understand the
like,
power of habit.
Yeah, you're not scared of those things, right?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
You're willing to accept the challenge and to do what it takes to get to the place that you're trying to go or whatever. Like, that totally makes sense to me.
Yeah.
No, that's cool, man.
I love that who is or what is a VanShoyck? Like, what does that mean? I mean, I think that's a perfect place to start, because ultimately that will be probably a romantic ideal, right? Or an ideal of what that is. And so then you can start to shape that, adult, that 18-year-old independent adult out of that.
Right.
And then the thing is, I think what it does is that inevitably just goes, well, we're not there in this area. So what thing do I have to have them go through or experience or learn or whatever? And that's really what the Rite of Passage, I think, is all about. It's like, okay, who is this person when they're an adult? And then obviously they're not that person now. So like, okay, what are the things that I can intentionally put into their experience and into their life and in front of them, and learn myself so that I can teach them something or whatever. Right. Yeah.
That word intentionality just keeps like ringing through. Like, it's like written, and I can feel it like dinging around in my head, man. Like, and I'll be honest with you, Aaron, when I first met you, like, I felt that from you. Like, this dude is doing everything that he does on purpose. And I thought that was really cool. And it was almost like an immediate, like, oh, I kind of look up to this dude, because I know that he's being thoughtful in all of his stuff. And then you started talking and I was like,
hold on, pump the brakes.
So, I think, yeah, man, the whole journey is there's purpose and intent behind it. And that is what I want for my kids.
Yeah.
Cool.
100%, man. That's a rad finish right there. I'm going to stop recording.